Start recording. And so, good morning, class. Been having some trouble connecting with you guys for English 112. So we're going to go ahead and record a lecture here today about summary analysis and what exactly we're looking for. And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the screen now. And I'm going to pull up the document where we're at. No, over here. This is the one I want down here, right there. Okay, so hopefully you can see what it is that I'm talking about with the share of the screen because I'm up here on the Rothbard analysis here. So I'm going to go ahead and come back to Zoom, and I'm going to go ahead and I want to share the screen. Okay, and that's not what I want. Okay, so I want to go ahead and come over here and pull up this screen. There we go. All righty, so that's not the one we want, actually. Excuse me. This is the one we want. All right. So this is the article I wanted you guys to read on the analytical mind. Let's see if we can make this a little bit bigger. Look on 25. Okay, good. That should make it a little bit easier to look at. So we don't need to actually read the entire article, but we do want to look at certain ideas in the article. So one of the most important ones that we need to look at is, why faculty want analysis. The reason why we want analysis is because analysis shows a higher level thinking skill that we want. And analysis is not just an opinion. I like this or I don't like it. Analysis more focuses in on to why you like or don't like something. So it tends to go into depth a heck of a lot more deeply than just some sort of knee-jerk reaction. So the definition of analysis really is basically pulling something apart and figuring out exactly how that thing works. So it's not just pulling it apart, right? But you also have to show how all these pieces kind of fit together. So when you bring your car in to be diagnosed by a mechanic, he's got a computer to help him, but he's going to look at all the various components that are under the hood of the car and see how they all fit together and know what they're supposed to be doing and try to figure out what could possibly be causing the problem with the vehicle. And just knowing, a code doesn't necessarily help with that. If you've ever brought your car into, say, O'Reilly Auto Parts and had them run a code machine on it, you could that the code simply indicates as any one of a number of things that could be causing that code. So you still have to go in and analyze which particular things could or would be the most likely causal factor behind the problems that you're experiencing with your car. So it is important that when you're dealing with analysis, you understand that you're looking at cause and effect, how things fit together, and trying to understand all that. So it's not just saying this is the carburetor, this is this is the fuel injected system, these are the spark plugs, this is the battery, this is the solenoid. It does, just showing what they are, what the parts are, is not enough. You have to show how they all fit and work together. How are they related as a whole? So the next thing we need to talk about is this difference between a summary, say, and an analysis. So a summary is a simple retelling of what's going on. So you're probably familiar with the Gospels. I guess it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The first three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are referred to often as the synoptic gospels, which comes from synopsis, meaning they basically just retell the life of Christ and what was happening in his life. The fourth gospel by John is called the Johannine Gospel. And although it retells some of the same events, that author is more concerned with Jesus as a human being, as a person. And so it has a different take and isn't referred to as a synoptic gospel. So synopsis simply retells the story. So if I ask you, for example, to discuss Hamlet's sanity, is he crazy or is he not? And you start writing me an essay that talks about, well, he does this and he does this and he does this and he does this and he does this, all you're really doing is retelling the story, because I've already read the play I don't know how many times. I don't need you to tell me what happens in it again. I know what happens in it again. What I want you to do is to tell me what incidents in the play actually prove your argument that he is or is not insane. For example, when he says such and such to so and so, when he's talking to Ophelia, for example, get thee to a nunnery, how does that show that he's not insane? Well, probably because he realizes that his Polonius and perhaps the king is actually spying on him. He's also very, very upset that Ophelia has probably been at this point traitorous to him, as it were, betraying him. And so he's angry because the one person he thought he could count on turns out she's in his mind betraying him. And he's delivering a message indirectly through her to the king and to Polonius. So this indicates the ability to think strategically, therefore he's not insane. You follow? Rather than just saying, well, he has this thing with Ophelia where he tells her to get to a nunnery. That's just retelling the story. Analyzing what that means, that's different, and it's much more important than just a mere summary. So they talk about something called a communication triangle in here. And they talk about how expressive writing is writer-centered. So if I'm talking about my summer vacation, it's all about I, me, what I did. And then there's the reader-centered. That's where you're trying to make sure that the reader follows your argument and you're trying to persuade them to do something. But then there's subject-centered. Then that's where you just focus on the subject you're talking about, and that's really what summary and analysis is all about. So when you're doing a summary analysis, remember, it's not about you. And it's not about the reader. In this case, that would be me. It's really about the subject, what you're writing about. Let's see, analysis versus summary. So when you're looking at analysis and argument, both arguments and analysis pull ideas apart and show why they're relevant. But the basic difference between, say, analysis and argument is that argument usually has a choice, and it usually has words like should or must, whereas analysis really doesn't focus so much on should or must or choice. It simply just pulls things apart and shows how they're connected. Later on, someone else can use that information and create a should or a must argument from it, and you may do the same yourself later on down the road. But simply for the purpose of analysis and summary, you avoid that argumentative style. You're simply trying to show this is what's going on in the article, and this is how it all fits together. Now, one of the most, we're going to leave expressive writing alone because I'm not really concerned about that right now. We're going to leave writing in the self alone. But what we are concerned about next is something that we call ethos or credibility. Where we're at. Here we go. Ethos and analysis on this page right here. Aristotle many years ago put down in his classic book, Rhetoric, the three most important parts of rhetoric: ethos, pathos, and logos. Pathos is an appeal to the emotion, and Aristotle thought that it could be a powerful thing because it can move people. But once you move them, you still have to give them something, a logos or an argument for them to follow. So there's this famous commercial which shows a bunch of abused dogs, and it goes on for about a minute. It has Sarah Laughlin's song, "In the Arms of the Angel, Far Away from Here." And the minute that's the commercial comes on, I'm reaching for the remote control and trying to turn it because it just nauseates me, right? You can only make somebody feel guilty for so long. There's a limit to how long that emotional appeal is going to last. So Aristotle saw it as useful, but not the most important tool in your handbag. Logos, we mentioned that earlier. That's the argument, the words that you use. And finally, there's ethos, and this speaks to your credibility. And it's very, very important in academic writing that you establish ethos credibility, because all it takes is one apparent lie or one apparent fact getting wrong, and suddenly your credibility is absolutely shot. So when we're using ethos, it's going to determine what sort of tone that we have. So when we're writing for English class or any academic writing at all, you want to have a non-adversarial tone because you're not looking for a fight. Now, I know this is different from the talking heads on television. Oftentimes we might tune in to these shows where, CNN or Fox, and the people are literally yelling at each other. Well, that's not collegial. That certainly isn't academic. Um, and they're looking for a fight. You're not doing that. All you're doing is saying, this is what I've found, and this is how it all fits together. And so you need to be collaborative and collegial. Treat readers as colleagues, worthy of respect, and who share your interest. And again, these talking heads on television, they don't do that. They clearly don't seem to respect anybody. But you need to make sure that when you're writing, you strike such a tone that says, you know what? I respect you as a human being, and I'm not going to talk down to you. I'm not going to belittle you in any way. I'm going to talk to you the way I want to be talked to myself. And finally, you need to make sure that whatever you say is carefully qualified. You can't say something like, if we build this wall along the border, it's going to be absolutely disastrous. Well, okay, what do you mean by disastrous? Um, well, let me see. If we build that wall, how could that be disastrous to the economy? Well, I don't know. You'd have to give me some reasons. But you can't just say it's going to be an unmitigated disaster without giving any proof or something like that. So you can say, well, if we don't build a wall, then we'll have uncontrolled immigration. This uncontrolled immigration will strain the ability of the local economy to take in workers who are working at half the price and not paying into the tax system. And then when they get sick because of laws that demand that they must be seen at a hospital, they can put a great strain on the infrastructure. So if we build a wall, we can stop all that, right? But if you do build the wall, what would that do? Why would that be a bad thing? How would that be disastrous? Well, certainly it stands against everything that people say America believes in, which is, the immigrants from around the world come to us, give to us your tired, huddled masses, which is what the Statue of Liberty has. It could it could be a testament to the failure of American economic policy, because the only reason why these Mexicans want to come over to our country is because our economy is so much better and offers so much more hope. So rather than spending all this money on a wall to keep people out, why don't we instead look at how our economic policy is causing economic devastation in countries like Mexico and Guatemala, and take steps to change that so that these people have better economies and better hope where they are, and then want to stay home and not come over to America. So those are things you could do. So carefully qualify. Don't say it's going to be disastrous. Just be careful with how you assert something. And finally, you want to have relative impersonality in the self-presentation. You don't want to say I, or me. You want to focus on the topic, whatever that might be. In this case, maybe the wall. So when we are working on our writing, we want to, and analysis, we want to be very, very careful about bad habits that we have. Counterproductive habits of the mind is what your reading calls them. So one of them is the reflex judgment. We automatically, when we're faced with new stimuli, will judge it as good or bad. This is a survival mechanism, probably ingrained in our genetics, so that we would survive and pass this on to our offspring. And the end result is we still have this. And we've got to be careful about that, because when we make these snap decisions like that, typically we make them along the lines of things we've already known, things that we're comfortable with, right? And if it challenges any of those things that we think are right or wrong, we might just dismiss it automatically, or say that it's bad, or just ignore it, right? So with the judgment reflex, we've got to be careful about that. And one of the ways to make sure that you don't necessarily fall into this pattern of judgment reflex, one, is just become conscious that we all do this, right? So when you feel yourself starting to make a judgment like that very quickly, you should probably just kind of stop for a little bit and kind of pull back. Another thing you can do This is really practical when you're dealing with couples counseling and things like that. Neither agree nor disagree with another person's position until you can repeat that position in a way the other person would accept as fair and accurate. So, in other words, if someone's arguing with you, you say, wait, wait, wait. So let me understand what you're saying. What you're saying is this. And if you say it and the other person goes, no, that's not what I mean at all, then you say, well, what do you mean again? They restate it. Then you say, okay, so what you're saying is this. Try and put it in your own words. And when you get to the point where they agree that what you're saying means what they're saying, then you have a clear understanding of what's actually being said. Now, this is important because most arguments really just boil down to a lack of clear communication and people not understanding what everybody else, what the other person is saying. So try to look at an argument and restate it in your own words. And if you can do that, it means you probably understand the argument. Also, try to eliminate words like should from your vocabulary, because that leads us to judgment statements. It leads us to, the either or, the black or white binary sort of way of thinking. So leave this alone. The second habit is naturalizing our assumptions or over personalizing. It's very natural for us to think that what we experience is right and natural. So, I had a younger brother who, as part of working his way through college, did some door-to-door book salesmanship, and he's like, "Yeah, you got to do this, you got to do that, and if you don't do it, you don't have a full experience. Oh, and you got to stay in a dorm because you don't stay in a dorm, you haven't got a real experience." And like, yeah, well, why don't you join the army? Why don't you live in a bed with 120 other people in the same room? He kicked out of bed at 5 in the morning, going 20-mile runs. Why don't you do that? He simply naturalized that his experience was good for everybody, and that's not necessarily true. So we got to be careful about thinking that just the way that we prefer things is the right way. It's not necessarily so. So that's a bad thing that people tend to fall into from time to time. So one of the things that we also do is something we call generalizing. And why do we do that? Well, it's because if we leave a movie or we read a book or something like that, we're going to generalize it was good or it was bad, right? Um, because we want to be able to handle the information and categorize it very quickly. But if someone says to me, for example, that they don't like a movie, I'm going to say, what did you like about it? Oh, it was bad. It was boring. So I'll press and I'll say, well, what was bad or boring about it? What didn't you like about the movie or about the book? And then if they start giving me specifics about the acting or the directing or the cinematography or the way the sound was used, particular scenes or plot devices that they didn't like, that's much more specific than just saying it was bad or it was boring, right? So if you think in terms of abortion, for example, abortion is wrong. Well, what's wrong about it? Well, it's killing. Well, why is it killing? Be more specific. While you're dealing with, what appears to be a viable tissue mass, you can actually live outside of the womb. Life begins at inception, and therefore, when you abort a baby, you're actually killing a human being. Those babies are actually covered by the Constitution, which guarantees life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. You're violating the constitutional rights. That is much more specific than saying abortion is bad. You follow? You don't generalize, be much more specific. One of the things in your arguments you want to do is distinguish between abstract and concrete words. If you learn nothing else in this class, learn this. Vagueness will kill you every time. Don't say it was a tree. Say it was an oak tree or a pine tree or a weeping willow. Notice how those give different connotations and different images, right? Don't say it was a flower. Was it a rose? Was it a lily? Was it a daffodil? That's a lot more specific than just saying flower or tree. So always try to be as specific as you possibly can. Now, another thing you would need to be careful about is uncertainty. And this is really the mark, I think, of an educated mind. Educated people know how little they know. So if you and I were to compare notes on English literature, I would trump your behind because I just know so much more than you. But by the same token, I also understand there's so much stuff out there. I have no idea. The information lag is huge. So if you take a thimble of water out of the ocean, right, and hold it up, that's my knowledge of English literature. The ocean is the other stuff that's out there. Now, my thimble may be more than your little drop, right? And in comparison, it looks like a lot, but it's just a thimble. So I know that I don't know it all. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in graduate school was that if a student asks you a question, don't pretend to know the answer if you don't. Because first of all, students aren't stupid. They'll figure it out. So the best thing to do is to simply say, well, I don't know, but I'll go find the answer. But we don't like that. We are hardwired to make sense of the world and have a grasp of it because we want to be in control. So we don't like admitting that we don't know. And so as a result, we think in terms of stereotypes, we think in terms of black and white. Um, we think in terms of things that give us comfort in terms of answers, but the truth is that really complex problems have very complex answers, and it takes a very, very I think agile mind to get to the point where they can see all these shades of gray. So when I was younger, if you had asked me, I could have solved all the world's problems because I knew the answers. But the older I got, the more I realized, well, there really are very few situations that are clearly black and white. There's a lot of gray area in there. And it's not as simple as we might make it out to be. So if someone provides you a simple answer for a complex situation, be very, very careful. You're probably dealing with a solution that's not really a solution. Um, so just be comfortable with that. Um, there's something called the slot filler mentality, and they talk about the 5 paragraph form. We'll discuss that later, I guess. But the point is, you got to think outside of the box, right? So if you've always approached doing one thing a particular way, maybe you should look at another way of doing it, rather than just kind of filling in the blanks, as it were. And of course, we need to learn to notice. That's one of my daughter's superpowers. She is so observant of the natural world, and she can see things that I can stare at for like 30 minutes and just not see. Um, she's much. Some people are better at noticing things than others, and this has to do not just with the world around you, but also with what you're actually reading. So this brings us to the 5 analytical moves, and this is probably the most important part of the reading. The first one is suspend judgment, and we should always suspend judgment. So we got this rush to judgment thing, right? It's good or it's bad, that sort of thing. We should suspend it. It's not to say that we shouldn't judge, but we shouldn't judge until we know we have all or at least most of the pertinent facts and that we actually understand what's being said or done. So suspend judgment, and then when you have a really good handle on it, then come along and make a judgment. 2, define significant parts and how they are related. This is true for every argument. What are the examples? What's the introduction? What is the main point? Number 3, this is really key here. Make the implicit explicit. Push observations to implications by asking, so what? Whenever anybody writes an essay, you have what we call a motivated rhetoric, because you and I both know writing takes a lot of time. Most of us don't like writing at all. And we only do it because we're made to do it. So when someone goes out of their way to write down an essay, takes the time and the trouble to do it, and then put it out there for us to read, he's got an axe to grind. And we should be asking ourselves, okay, what is that axe? What is this person saying or not saying, excuse me, that is understood? What's his basic view of the world? And we should be able to try and get at that. As in a conversation, what is said or what is written is not always as important as what is not said or not written. So we have to look at what the person's not telling us, but is strongly implied in the writing. Number 4 is look for patterns of repetition and contrast and anomalies. That's very important as well too, because this will give you some idea about what's going on. And finally, just keep asking questions. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of the article to you. It's all down here. They go into in greater detail. But what I want to do now instead is I want to go over to this article here. This is by Murray Rothbard. It's called Date Rape. Now, one of the first things we want to do when we're analyzing an article is we want to look at, okay, who wrote it? It's 1991, so it's been like 20 years, right? And Rothbard is an economist and social critic. So his specialty is economics, and he's a social critic. But let's see if we can find out more about Murray Rothbard. Let's see. So here is Murray Rothbard. So Murray Rothbard, no, leave us alone. Murray Rothbard he mentioned he's an economist. He's a libertarian, I think. Let's come down here a little bit. Is it gonna let me do that on the page? No, not let me do it. Maybe it's over here. Yeah, there we go. So he's an economist. These are the places that he worked. Um, doesn't have everything here that I want. Basically, he was influential in the formation of the Libertarian Party here in America, and he had a particular style of economy that he followed. And he was a well-known social commentator in something called the National Review, and where the article comes from. If we go back to this article over here, we'll see that it actually comes from the National Review. So let's go look at the National Review and see what the National Review is. So this is about us in the National Review. It was founded in 1955 by William F. Buckley. William F. Buckley was the creator of the neoconservative movement here in America. So in terms of intellectual prowess, a pretty important guy. And the National Review is considered by many conservatives to be an absolutely credible source of information, and they turn to it for ideas and information on any one of a number of issues in America. So the National Review, although a credible source, is also extraordinarily conservative. So we need to know that. So Rothbard, being a conservative, a special type of conservative called a libertarian, right, writing for the conservative National Review, is going to have a conservative outview, right, on the article he wants to write about. So this is an article he wrote about called Date Rape. Now we don't, I think, hear that term quite as often today as we did say back in the 1990s, but it's merged into something else a little bit that we're going to be writing about in this class. So let's go ahead and start looking at the article. So we know who Rothbard is. We know who he's writing for. It's probably credible from a certain perspective, right? So he's not a hack, if you will. So let's see how his essay is put together. So a lot of strange things. I'm up over here now. I don't know if I can actually highlighting this. No. So a lot of strange things are happening on college campuses these days, and one of them is the kvetching, about the alleged epidemic of date rape. Two things to notice here. One, notice how he uses kvetch. Kvetch is a Yiddish term. It means to complain, but it means to, you kvetch about something, you're complaining about something that's not really all that important, right? So you might be kvetching about, what? We got fish again in the cafeteria? Or it's cold and I don't know what time it is. That's kvetching, right? So immediately by using the term kvetching, he belittles the topic and he puts date rape into quotation marks right here, again indicating, yeah, maybe it's not a real thing. So from the get-go, we see him using slanted words, if you will, to talk about the topic of date rape. A special report to the New York Times on the subject by William Seelish III. So New York Times is more liberal by far than the National Review. Subbed by its title, What is Rape? To a libertarian, or indeed to any sensible person, there is no problem. Now notice what he's saying here. He's implying that if you're not a libertarian, if you don't agree with me, you are not a sensible person. If the sex took place against the will of one of the parties, then it was rape. And if not, not. If it was, you call in the police. If it wasn't, you don't. So he's saying rape, by definition, should be a simple black and white issue. And so remember I told you, be wary of people who say it's really very simple. It's really black and white. And that's the sort of analysis he's offering you right here. He continues. But to the current generation of college students, things are very different. One says, quote, it's such a fuzzy topic, unquote. And another adds, quotes, it's easy to look at sex and second guess, end quote. There follows a lot of guff about how the feminist movement has succeeded in alerting countless co-eds about this terrible problem. But why should it take a feminist theoretician to inform a girl she has been raped? Of course, the implication is, shouldn't she know if she's been raped? And notice over here, the idea of fuzziness and second guessing, but he uses the word guff. So we got kvetch up over here, a little bit higher up. We got guff over here. And notice the word feminist here, the word feminist here. What's this other one? Feminist over here. feminist down over here. So he's using that term feminist quite a lot. We look for patterns of repetition. So feminist is one of those words he keeps throwing in there. And then we have kvetching and guff. These terms belittle the other side's argument. So we're keeping an eye on that. And he continues reading on. We find that many men are confused about these rising protests by college females. The guy stirs that women with whom they have had sex did not say no and did not physically resist, yet later complained of date rape. Other angry men claim that in some cases, women have encouraged their advances. But the feminists lash back that these are after the fact excuses. Instead, sexual intercourse, they argue, should proceed from clear and mutual consent. This comes from the article he's using right here. Now we're getting somewhere, he says. For the girl did not resist and did not the girl did not say no and did not physically resist, then sex did indeed take place by, quote, clear and mutual consent. Then he says, what do feminists want? Will they only be satisfied if the two parties sign an express consent form before the act and have it notarized on the spot, with the form sent in triplicate to their respective attorneys and to the county clerk? If so, the notary publics in college towns are in for a thriving business. Now, this is not a serious proposition on Rothbard's part. This is a technique we call reduction absurdio, or absurdio reduction. I have to look that up. It's where you take the basic argument and follow it through to the most absurd scenario you can concoct to make it look silly, to basically tear down the argument. And so no, feminists aren't saying they want notarized this, notarized that. That's just Rothbard saying, my God, look how irrational these people are. They're going to ask for this next. Well, no, nobody's asked for that. Do you follow? But he does come back to clear and mutual consent. So he continues on down. A clue to the peculiar fuzziness of the argument. So he's saying feminist argument is fuzzy, right? Can be found in the assumptions of the famed Koss study, headed by the shrink Mary Koss. In trying to find out the extent of rape on college campuses, Ms. Koss defines sexual assault as use of force or, quote, intercourse as a result of intentionally getting the woman intoxicated. And we find various references to women being reluctant to report the rape because one or the others were drunk. And he says, well, no, drinking indeed. Isn't everyone familiar with the old poem, Candy is dandy, but liquor is quicker? So basically what he's saying, well, what, you're surprised that men and women in college go out and have drinks and then have sex? I mean, of course that happens. That's what they do in college. You know, they got freedom, they got raging hormones. This is what's going to happen. But what Koss is arguing in our article, it's actually the scope of rape on college campus that came out in 1987, is that basically men or weaponizing, if you will, alcohol, using it to get women drunk so that they can't actually legally give consent. But his basic argument is, well, they've been doing this since the dawn of time. Why is it all of a sudden now a crime? He continues. The New York Times article details, the re-education process. So re-education, that's a term for brainwashing. We get that from communist China and the book 1984. At Lehigh University, and remember that name, Lehigh University, a male student was asked if he had ever committed rape. First saying hell no, the student was later talked into realizing that he had, and that not saying no was not sufficient to establish consent. He throws in this snarky line about notarized agreements. And later, the poor guy, admitting he was very confused, wrote a self-criticism article for the student paper, confessing his sin. I was uninformed and incorrect, he groveled, and now he loves Big Brother, oops, Big Sister. If you don't know the reference to that book, then you should probably go read it. Poor Orwell never knew the full depths of political correctness. So we have the term political correctness. We don't see that around very much these days, but it was big in the 1990s and 80s. So there are several ways by which this terrible crisis on the campus can be solved. Now he's going to offer here a list of solutions that aren't really solutions. It's like this thing here we talk about triplicate forms and things. So these are his non-solutions, really. We could go back to prohibition. Right, and of course we can't do that. We tried prohibition, it didn't work. Or we could go back to the good old days of campuses before the 50s, especially in the South, and not only ban co-ed dorms, but abolish co-education altogether and insist on official chaperones for girls on every date with dance cards fit out in advance and included with the chaperone. You probably don't know what a dance card is, but if you went to a get-together between men and women, guys had to actually fill out a dance card for a girl to dance with, and they'd go in that order, and there were chaperones everywhere just to make sure that nothing improper happened. Well, first of all, we're not going to go to prohibition. That's not going to happen. We're not going to go back to non-co-ed at the dance cards. And then he says, so finally, why not go whole hog toward left Puritanism? That's a term he concocts, and define all sex as per se coercive, meaning all sex by definition is coercive. That would mean all sex is rape, right? That would clear up all the fuzziness, and sex, or at least heterosex, could be outlawed completely. Or is that the point after all? So the end here gives a real big clue as to some of the unspoken premises of Murray Rothbard, right? So he's saying heterosex being outlawed. The implication then is that only homosexual sex would be allowed. And who's pushing for the outlaw of heterosexual sex in his mind? Well, that would be the feminists, right? The feminists who are trying to say it's not consensual sex, it's rape. You follow? So in his mind, feminist then somehow becomes equated with homosexuality and lesbians. Therefore, this is some sort of lesbian feminist plot to outlaw heterosexual sex in some sort of power grab and a political reason that Murray Rothbard doesn't explain. But underlying his entire argument is that these gay feminists were involved in some sort of culture war to steal or gain power somehow over heterosexual men and make us all look to be evil and bad because by definition all sex would be rape. Now, this is what he's basically arguing. And we look at how he puts it together. I mean, there are things that we need to think about. So one, we mentioned the kvetching over here, the guff over here. Notice what he does with Mary Koss. He calls her a shrink, where shrink is a diminutive term for psychiatrist. So calling a psychiatrist a shrink belittles the accomplishment that Ms. Koss had done. In fact, so that's one of the things that he does is he uses words designed primarily to dismiss or belittle the other side. So that speaks to his credibility as an author. He's not having a collegial tone. He's being very mocking. He's being very sarcastic. So when he's over here about notes and triplicate notarizing and all these things over here, coeducation, DARMs, and prohibition, those aren't real solutions that he's offering, right? So it's just him being sarcastic. So in addition to using particular words that belittle, he's also sarcastic. He also says, so you don't agree with me as a libertarian, you're not sensible. Notice also how he stacks the deck. Who is he quoting from in the article? It's all, except for when he's, looking at Mary Koss's study, it's guys, it's college males he's quoting from. To be fair, don't you think it would be a nice idea to maybe go get a couple of quotes from some college females? Does he do that? No, he does not. He stacks the deck, only showing how men feel about this. Well, that's not a good thing in terms of academic writing. You have to look at least one other point of view here, and he doesn't do that. So the poor guys feel bad, and he even refers to this other guy who says, I didn't rape anybody, and then he says, oh, well, maybe I did, right? And Rothbard calls that basically brainwashing and political correctness taken to an extreme, okay? So his ethos, his credibility suffers because he's really not presenting both sides of the issue. And instead of engaging with the other side in a way that treats the other side with respect, he belittles it. Instead of going after their argument, basically says, look, it's very simple. Either they raped or they weren't raped. So he's looking at the ideas from a perspective that is grossly oversimplified, as we're going to find out. Now, there's some other things going on that he doesn't tell you about. So Mary Koss wrote The Scope of Campus Rape. A report released in 1987, she found that 25% of all women who attend college will either be raped or sexually assaulted, raped or a victim of attempted rape while they're there. Now, people look at these numbers and say that's too high. How can this possibly be happening? With 25% of women going to schools having this happen to them, that they just wouldn't go anymore. It can't be that high. And yet, we had a study a few years back in 2007, the Krebs study, the CSA study, that showed that 20% of all women. So we have several studies of sense causes study up to. I think Krebs put out another one recently that showed that the numbers are fairly consistent, that in fact, yeah, it's a very high incidence of rape and sexual assault on campuses. Not every guy is doing it. Clearly, there's some sexual predators out there that are doing this, but it is a pretty high thing. Um, this has to do with. Let me bring up a little article here for you. We're at about us, Cleary. Okay, so let's look at the years. Remember, this article was written in 1991. In 1986, Jean Cleary, a 19-year-old college student, was raped and murdered in her college dorm. Later on, her parents found out that Lehigh, and this happened at Lehigh University. And if you remember, where was that guy from who said that he raped or did not rape? It was right here, Lehigh University, right? And so this took place in 1990, this bit that he's writing about. So we come back to Miss Cleary. She was raped and murdered in her own dorm at Lehigh University. The parents later found out that Lehigh University was in fact hiding the incidences of aggravated assault and sexual assault on their campus. And they sued the university, claiming that had they known how dangerous the environment was, they never would have sent their precious daughter to that campus. And they won. And then they used these proceeds to force through something called the Cleary Act. And the Cleary Act is still in effect today. It's the first attempt really to get a handle on violence on campus and sexual assault in particular. And it requires all colleges and universities to detail every incident that happens on their campus. You can go now, if you went to any university in America, and say, I want to see your Cleary report. And they have to give it to you. It's public knowledge and they can't hide it, which is one of the problems we've been having, because it turns out they actually have been trying to hide it. But the Cleary Act was very important. And it was the first turning point of looking at these incidences of assault on campus. So that happened in 1986, right? In 87, Mary Koss puts out her study showing how high the incidence of rape and assault is, right? 4 years later, we get this article by Murray Rothbard on date rape. Now, I promise you, Murray Rothbard knew about Cleary. He knew about what happened at Lehigh University. And when he mentioned that this kid at Lehigh University had this program at Lehigh University, he doesn't put it into context for you. He doesn't say that this was the epicenter of where all this attention towards sexual violence on campus actually started, was at Lehigh University. And he fails to tell you that. And he was very well aware of it. So at the very least, this is disingenuous on his part. At the worst, again, he's stacking the deck. He's not contextualizing it. Something terrible happened, and people are trying to do something about it. But rather than show you the background of that, he just says, well, this is really political correctness run amok. Not the fact that women are being raped and murdered on a campus, and this has led to a cause and effect situation here. So when we look at this and when we're analyzing it, we have to ask ourselves the question, why? Why did he do that? And it makes me wonder if this is actually a credible thing at all. Now, what are we going to need? Let me pop up something over here for you, still on the screen. So I'm coming into MS Word. I'll do this for you right now. Remember, so what am I looking for in a summary analysis? First of all, always make sure you use Times New Roman 12-point font. Make sure you always double space, right? And your analysis is going to start out looking like this. There's going to be your name, first and last. Then it's going to be my name. Then there's going to be the class name. Then there's going to be the date. So we can do 26 August 2020, right? Then we skip a space, we go to the middle, and we give ourselves a title. Let's say summary analysis of date rape, like that. Let's go ahead and hit spell check. So that's what it's going to look like. So make sure that all your writing has that first part right there. Your name, my name, class name, date, and then of course the title. And then your first sentences are going to look very, very similar. You have to be author, title, and a brief synopsis or a brief outline, if you will. So the author, Murray Rothbard, in his article, Date Rape. So notice I've got author and title, Date Rape, argues that date rape is a made-up crisis invented by feminists for some unnamed political reason. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what your first sentence is going to look like for all of your. I mean, you can do it another way around. You can say, in Date Rape, Murray Rothbard, and then argues whatever. So just sum up what the article is about in your own words, and then we need to have so Roman numeral one would say the summary, right? So the summary then would be one. He talks about the concept of date rape and how men are confused. Right. Then he talks about what's the next thing? Mutual consent. Then he talks about the cost study, right? Then he talks about the student from Lehigh University who said no, then said yes, right? And then he basically ends it by saying this might be a way to rule out heterosex, something like that. That's how he kind of ends it. Okay, so that's sort of the summary of what he's talking about in there. And so the summary just simply says this is what he said in the article. Then you want to do the analysis, right? So now the analysis is a little bit different. So you look at certain things. So for example, you might want to say ethos, right? So does not give Cleary background. On Lehigh University. And I'm sorry if I'm doing this pretty poorly here. Background on the background, there you go. On Lehigh, there you go, University. Okay. 2, belittles opposing argument with words like kvetch, guff, shrink. Belittles cough. So argument and opposing argument and opponents, I guess. Let's see. 3, oversimplifies complex issue, right? 4, stacks the deck with quotes only from college males, no females, right? 5, signs ridiculous scenarios to feminists. All right. But clearly sees feminists as behind the problem. which he sees as made up and part of political correctness designed to make all hetero men look bad. Something like that. Okay. So these are some of the things that he is arguing, made up, and sees man behind the problem, which he sees as made up and something. I don't even know what I tried to write there. Uh, and a form of political correctness. Here we go. Designed to make all hetero men look bad. Okay. Now, when you're done with that, okay, you need to have a third part where you say, let me get rid of this over here, where you say essentially, is this a good source? Why or why not? Could you use this? And the deal is, we have here, this source has some serious problems with it. I mean, clearly. So could you use it? Yeah, you could use it, so long as you understand what the nature of the source is. Um, it is important, it is imperative that when you are doing an argumentative paper that you look at both sides, and both sides is oversimplification. It's often just more than two sides to an issue, but at least two sides. You usually have two major sides to an issue, and you need to look at them both. So if you find an article in your research that does not support your thesis, that doesn't mean you can't use it. You should use it. You should say, well, this side of the issue argues A, B, and C, right? And then you go out of your way to show why A, B, and C is either wrong or weak, and show why this side of the argument actually makes more sense. So doing so shows the reader that you actually went out and looked at both sides, unlike Mr. Rothbard, who really didn't do that. He didn't give the other side a fair shake in this article, but you need to do that when you're writing. And so that you are being fair-minded and open about it, and that you're not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes, and that you are a fair, credible, and impartial person when it comes to whatever you're writing about. So this is what your outline for the summary analysis should look like, right? And you just go ahead and write it. So it's gonna be like 2 paragraphs, right? And then to be very, very long. You can fit the whole thing on 1 page. And this is the same technique that you would use for the other summary analysis that you would do in the class. You're gonna do a total of 4. So we're looking at the campus sexual assault issue, and I'm going to provide you with readings that say it's not a problem, like date rape, for example, and I'm going to provide you with readings that say yes, yes, it is a problem, and you're going to have to do a summary analysis in 4 of them. You can use this one as one of the 4. Nothing wrong with that. That's why it walks you through it, but you still have to do 3 more. So you got one by Rothbard that says it's not a problem. Then you need to find another one from that group and do the same thing like we just now did. And then you find 2 from the group that says it is a problem, and you give me 2 summary analysis just like this, and you submit those. So I'm sorry we weren't able to get together as a class and do this, but I'm going to go ahead and post this up in YouTube and make it available to you guys today. If you have any questions, feel free to text me at area code 785. Well, I'm not going to give the number. It's in the syllabus. Feel free to text me. Feel free to email me. And I'll be happy to respond to any questions you may have. And I'm going to stop the sharing of the screen right here. I'm going to go back to me. And I know this is not the most exciting thing you're going to look at today, but I hope this really gives you some insight into what it is that I'm looking for in the summary analysis. And indeed, this, whenever you do any scholarly research, see, I need to remember to look at the camera. I'm looking down here. I'll go look up the camera. Whenever you're doing any scholarly research, it's very, very important that you follow these analytical moves that we're talking about. The idea of trying to figure out what exactly somebody is not saying, where are the patterns of repetition. How is the credibility being established? Is it not being established? Those sorts of things. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go. I'm going to load this up into Moodle, and hopefully we'll be able to get that first summary done. This ends our this ends it for today. Thank you.